Okay, today we continue in pulling old podcasts from the old days. I mean, I'm like 70 deep, so how far into history is it, right? But we're going back to some of the earlier podcasts and touching base with some of those people. And this week we are going to get to talk to one of the most popular podcasts that we had, I think because she's a tireless promoter for these things. It's Margaret Schedel. Who teaches at Stony Brook, New York Stony Brook, and also is right in the middle of a whole ton of things. I've been following her on Facebook, and it's amazing the number of things that she's got juggling at any given time. And so we're going to get a chance to kind of ping her about a bunch of that stuff today. So with that, I want to say hi to Meg. Hi, Meg. How are you?
Hi, Darwin. I am, busy,
yeah,
as you said, but I'm glad that we found a time that this would work.
Yeah, I am too. So why don't we start off by having you give us kind of an overview of what all is in the hopper for you?
I just was out visiting San Francisco and somebody asked me that same question. And I was just like, I have so much going on that I'll forget stuff if you ask me what's going on. But what am I working on like this week is a book chapter on the visual control of audio synthesis, sort of an overview of that throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. I just got back from San Francisco where I attended David Wessel's memorial and also did some work with Meyer Sound. I'm working on a sonification of gait for Parkinson's patients and starting to research another chapter on gestural control of audio, and I'm writing a violin and alto flute piece with electronics.
Okay, that's great. You don't sit in a bathtub with like candles in the background and stuff very often, do you?
When I'm composing, I try to take a little bit of time, but other than that, it's kind of crazy. I also browbeat Miller Puckett into letting me write a chapter in his new book when I was walking around Berkeley with him and wrote him an abstract on the plane on the way home. So I'm not doing enough.
Yeah, no rocks left unturned in your life. That's great.
Note to self, Darwin, do not take walks with Meg.
Well, it's funny because I ran into you on the sidewalk outside of the NAMM show.
That's right.
And I ended up with like 3 projects just because I bumped into you. I didn't know how that happened.
I'm like, this is my friend and he's doing this stuff, and it would be really cool if you incorporated that into Jitter because it's good stuff. And
So what, first of all, let's talk a little bit about David. David Wesley, you said you went to his memorial. What interactions had you had with him, and what did he kind of mean to you?
He is kind of everything to me, and I didn't quite realize it until he was gone. He's really one of those people that was both a consummate musician, a really like top-notch researcher who understood the science and the psychology, and like a genuinely amazing leader in person. So I don't think I met anybody ever who didn't like him, didn't respect him, and didn't enjoy spending time with him. I mean, he was just, I just got tenure at Stony Brook, and I've been sort of trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. It sounds so corny. But I was just in the garden of Sinmat one morning, and I was just like, I want to be David Wessel. I want to be that person that is just so happy to be doing what they're doing that it's infectious.
Yeah, I hear that, and I actually think that you're on a good track there because, if I think of him, one of the things that he was, as you suggest, he was a consummate artist as well as a very influential person. But one of the things that I thought was pretty fantastic about him is the way that he would draw people together, and he would be just like, he seemed to have no fear of just saying, hey, you and me, let's talk, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was amazing the groups of people that he was able to bring together and how that ended up influencing the kind of new media arts. And so now you were out in San Francisco. You said you were meeting with Meyer Sound.
Yeah. So
What were you doing with them?
yeah. So at the I met the guys from Meyer at the Bone Flute to Auto Tune conference, and they were showing off some of their new spatializing software with Zach. He's down in San Diego, and I just met them through him, and we started talking, and they're doing some awesome stuff, and we got along. And so I don't know how this happened, but now we're working on some projects together. Very specifically, Meyer Sound is investing in AVB, which is this audio video bridging, which is going to have audio, video, and control data sent over Ethernet. So they're building that into some of their speakers. And Motu has started making some interfaces with this standard. So I'm really super excited about this new sort of protocol. It's going to make installations and multi-channel audio so much easier because it's just going to reduce the number of cables that you need, and it's going to be fast.
Yeah, well, this is kind of interesting because, over the years, and especially because I work for Cycling 74, which means that everybody with a kooky idea shows up at the doorstep. There have been large numbers of groups that have proposed putting media data over the Ethernet wire. What makes the AVB stuff different, and why do you think it is that it's taking off where some of these other standards had not?
So it is driven sort of by the IEEE, so the same people that made the 802 base 11 stuff. So it's actually an industry standard, and it's being promoted by the auto industry, which is kind of weird. But when you think about the cars as becoming these like infotainment centers where they're trying to bring in a lot of data from the sensors in the car, give you distributed video to your passengers so that your kids don't have to watch the same video, God forbid. And to sort of integrate them and shut things down all at the same time. This time-based synchronization element that was missing from a lot of this packet switching protocol has now been implemented because they're actually able to build the switches that can reorder the packets more quickly than the audio rate. So it's crazy town.
Yeah, it kind of is, but at the same time, it's interesting. Now, first of all, I'll say, on one hand, it's kind of surprising, to hear that the auto industry is driving this. But if you think about it, for most people now, the best speaker and amplification system they have is the one in their cars.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. But beyond that, that's an industry that just from pure dollar standpoint completely dwarfs anything the music industry is going to do. So it seems like that's a way, when someone like that gets involved, that's a way to get these standards organizations involved as well, because now there's, sort of God's money behind the whole thing.
Exactly. And what's nice is that they're actually talking to the media people. So there's going to be native OSC in AVB because they were like, oh, that's important to you guys. So, okay, it's not a big deal for us to put that in there. So it's nice that it's not just the auto industry. They're saying, these crazy multimedia artist people have been doing this stuff for a long time. So maybe there's something we could learn from them.
Right.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting when your brake sensors all of a sudden have an OSC message getting sent to your iPod or something, right?
Exactly.
When I saw you in Anaheim, you also said you were doing something with waveguide something or other.
Yeah.
I didn't catch the whole thing, and I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, so the other thing that Meyer Sound is working on is wave field synthesis. And this is sort of like FFT for sound waves. So if you can think of how multiple sine waves can combine and make different timbres, this is a way that multiple sound waves can combine and make spatialized audio. So you have a bunch of really small speakers, and then you're doing these incredible calculations, and then you can actually place sound in space using a row of speakers, and it won't have a sweet spot. It will just always sound like it's coming from that place, no matter where you are in the room.
Okay. Yikes.
Yeah.
That sounds, well, first of all, that sounds incredible. And secondly, that sounds like a situation where, yet again, someone's going to try and compel us into having 45 speakers in our living room. How does it work in the real world? How many speakers do you have to make this even make sense? And how much researchy is it versus sellable?
Yeah, so I think the sound bars, if you know that sort of paradigm sound bar stuff,
right,
that's starting. So that is a sort of real world, very simple model of some wave field synthesis going on. So these rows of speakers, the speakers themselves are kind of small, and then they're in maybe a 4 to 5 foot array for the smallest one that Meyer's making right now.
Okay.
But it works. And I don't know how small it's going to be able to be made, but the fact that it has such resolution, I think as you have a really big TV, you could just have a really big wave field synthesis thing sitting on the top of it. Why not?
Sure. Good point. Well, and given that most people have now a living room wall dedicated to their TVs, it doesn't seem that out of line.
Yeah, and what's nice about it is you're not then having to put the 5.1 speakers all around and the wires and everything. It's just one row and then your subwoofer. But it's able...
So the single row actually places things throughout a room?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Mind melting.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's mind melting. And also, it seems like... Well, I'm glad you're involved, because it seems to me like audio artists... would eat this stuff up, because it's a completely new experience in terms of how you can work in an installation.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm really excited to be doing this. I don't know how many I'm getting and when, but whenever the first real prototype rolls off the line, I get to do an installation at the lab in San Francisco, and I could not be more excited.
Well, just make sure you call me when you get your prototype, because then it's going to be party at Meg's house. That sounds like a lot of fun.
I think it's going to be party at Meyer Sound. I don't think I get it at my house.
Okay. All right. Well, then, and we're all going to San Francisco, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm desperately trying to wrap my head around the math of it all, just so that I'm not sitting there just sort of moving buttons around without understanding it. That's kind of important to me.
Well, and it's probably important in general, because especially when you're working with the researchers and the developers of this stuff, the last thing you want to be is like, oh, okay, well, let's dumb it down for the artist.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you start dumbing things down, you also start closing doors for exploration.
Yeah. And I think that's what they're excited to work with me, because I sort of have that math background, and I'm a chick, and they're like, what? I mean, it was fun going around NAMM and sort of talking to the people that are doing ABB stuff, and they're just like, wait, you're a girl and you're going to this session on ABB and you're asking me like intelligent questions about it? That's just weird. And I'm like, don't be sexist.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, but that's I mean, it is an important thing to note, because again, in terms of you kind of having an impact on both academia and the industry, a lot of it comes from the fact that you're, in addition to being a good promoter of yourself and others, you also stand out in the crowd because you're a woman doing it, and because you're tenured faculty who hasn't already, gone into the hot tub for the rest of their career or whatever.
I'm 10th tempted. I'm tempted.
So that's pretty interesting. Now, you're also in the middle of doing all this book writing. To what extent is some of the tech-weenie stuff that you're finding out in San Francisco going to make its way into these books?
Not that stuff. That stuff right now more focused on articles, getting that out.
How tied into IP and sort of like closed information is all of that? I mean, obviously the AVB stuff, since it's coming through the IEEE, is going to be publicly understood. But it seems to me like this. What did you call it? Wave what synthesis?
Wave field synthesis. So a lot of people are trying to crack this nut. So I'm sure that Meyer has their own patents on it, and right now they like had to lease some computers from like DARPA to do the FFTs quickly enough in order to make this happen. So
right. So a cray in every living room is in our future, right?
Well, in 10 years it'll be on our iPads. It's
that's
crazy.
Good point. So what kind of other stuff are you working on? So you mentioned the visual control of sound and gestural control of sound. Can you fill us in a little bit about what exactly you're talking about there?
Yeah, so
especially with visual control, there's been all kinds of people with ideas about that.
There have been, and so it's been hard to sort of narrow down the focus into just one chapter. I'm like, this is a whole book, but I got asked to write on the visual control of audio synthesis in the Oxford Handbook for Algorithmic Music. So when we think of algorithms, we more tend to think of programs, but it's really just a set of instructions. So I start with the Rhythmicon. So it was a device that Henry Cowell asked Leon Theremin to build him so that he could hear sort of very complex polyrhythms, and it's controlled by a piano-looking keyboard that then turns on lights, which shine in these rotating discs and create polyrhythms. And I'd written about that for Organized Sound, 10 years ago. Jesus. Okay. And going through the sort of visual music people like Fischinger and John Whitney. There's also this Russian guy whose name I'm forgetting that did similar things, drawing sound waves on the film strips. Mm-hmm. Daphne Oram, so the Aramix machine, drawing directly onto film strips. The Xenakis UPIC system. And then all hell breaks loose in the 80s, basically. And I was like, how am I going to bound this? And so I thought that I would maybe not do systems that have video, but instead focus on picture, still image.
I see. Okay.
So Sean Greeley does this really cool thing where he paints and then moves the picture under a microscope, basically, to control audio, and that's a cool project.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and Yasuo Tone took Chinese characters and sonified them in this like multimedia. And I was just talking about this Macromedia. What was that program way back in the day? The Multimedia Macromedia
Director.
Yes, good job, Darwin. Yeah. So trying to find
that's old guy.
I know.
Reader right there. Actually, I mean, it's funny you mentioned Director. I am actually looking for a machine to run it too, simply because I have a copy of Laurie Anderson's Puppet Hotel.
Oh, wow.
I would get a computer just specifically to run that. Huh. It was so beautiful, but, Director, Ancient of Days, finding a machine that'll run it, really hard.
Yeah. So I'm keeping an eye out at Stony Brook because they never throw anything away because it's illegal. So I'm quite convinced that I'll be able to find some old machine that some scientist decided was too slow that is in perfectly good condition, unlike the ones that we've run into the grounds in our labs. So
right.
If I find one, I will let you know, because I also need to find one so I can try to wrap my head around what he was doing.
Indeed.
And then the final thing that I sort of broke my rule on is Andrea Polis, I think is the name, who did this Ocusonics, where using a computer vision on an eyeball to control audio. And I just sort of, I was like, I'm going to break my rule for this because it's sort of the organism of vision now controlling
Right.
audio. And then I end with Daniel Temkin, who is using photos as a way to program the computer. So his language is not keyboard. It's literally taking the photos with the correct color balance in order to program a computer to say hello world. And so I saw that at Harvestworks and I was like, hey, you also do audio stuff. So can you make a version of this that does audio? Because I really want to write about this in my book.
Right.
So I don't know how kosher that is to sort of ask someone to write something new in your overview of what's going on. But I was just like, that is stunning to me that you're actually using photos as your programming language, not just as input. Like literally you are programming with image.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's kind of interesting, first of all, that, I mean, it makes sense to talk to them about that as a direction as you're writing about it, because if nothing else, because you're writing about it, you're extremely tuned into the history of what's going on.
Yeah.
And so as a result, talking to an artist about how that history is and how they might be able to fit into that seems totally in play.
All right, good.
There you go. All right, there's
Darwin said
your
it's
confirmation.
okay, you
Darwin said it's fine. So, it's interesting that you kind of laid this out, though, as one where you had to kind of bound yourselves. Because when you first started talking about it, and first of all, I didn't catch initially that it was about synthesis. Do you really focus on sound generation, or do you get involved in like visuals as a controlling mechanism for mixing and stuff?
I really focused on synthesis.
Okay. That's interesting, because when you first mentioned it, I immediately jumped to like the visual mixing and
right.
All that kind of stuff, and yeah, how there was like 40 people who all were pretty sure they knew exactly what that meant.
Yeah.
And it makes me want to ask questions about the writing process, because let's face it, first of all, doing one of the Oxford books means that you're actually kind of writing history, right? You're one of those people that's getting to decide history.
Oh, okay.
Not to put too big of a weight on your shoulders, but there you go. The question I have is, how do you do that with something like media art where things are shifting so quickly, and how something can go from the next great thing or the new thing to being like over in an eye blink? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I try not to say that this is the newest and greatest and awesomest thing. That's why sort of AVB right now for me is an article, because I'm like, this is the newest and greatest and most awesomest thing. But I wouldn't want to put that in a book.
Right.
And so with the books, and it's been interesting throughout the tenure process. People were really confused by me because they're like, so you perform and you write music and you program computers and you do new research on methods for human-computer interaction, and you also write about history of technology and the arts, and you curate art shows. So who are you and why do you do so many things? And I think they all relate to each other. And so I actually really think it's important to know the history of the field. And so I can feel comfortable talking about that and then say, here are 3 fairly new things that I think we can draw a parallel to the past. And I'll just write about them and they're interesting, but I'm not going to say that this is the definitive canon. it's just trying to make connections between these things that I find interesting, trying to represent a diversity of ages, genders, sexualities, races, etc. So, I mean, I'll get so excited. I was like, "Yay, Andrea's a girl!" Um, and just trying to show what can be done and what has been done. And I guess focusing on the pieces that were more about the art and a little bit less about the technology, and why they work on an aesthetic level, in addition to explaining the technology.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, what do you do personally to sort of avoid your own biases, or do you not worry about it and do you just embrace the thing?
I tend to use Facebook a lot.
Yeah, I noticed.
So I'll just be like, who knows about this stuff? And then, I'll try to do at least a 5 degree of difference sort of from anything that I can find, which is insane. And at some point I have to cut myself off. I'm like, I have to start writing now. And so, I mean, for the electronic music book with Cambridge and Nick and Scott, I wrote a chapter on sound art, and I literally had a stack of books and articles like that was taller than I was. And I'm trying to condense that down into a chapter. And so at some point I just have to say, it's me. I'm writing it. I'm making these decisions, and I could have made other decisions, and maybe in a parallel universe I made a different decision. So I'm fine with it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you talk about sort of having your fingers in a lot of pies. You're at Stony Brook. Are you in the music department?
Okay. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I am. My tenure is in the music department.
Okay.
I was hired to be in the Consortium for Digital Arts, Culture, and Technology.
Okay.
So this is a sort of umbrella organization with people from many different departments.
Right.
Then I am affiliated, which means that like I'm on the list of people that know about this sort of thing and could be helpful for people, with the art department. So because of the sound art and the curating that I do, and Devotion Gallery, I am affiliated with the computer science department because of the sort of multimedia gaming aspect of what I do. I'm affiliated with the biomedical informatics department, in sonifying data, and they're very interested in that. And hilariously, the director, Joel Saltz, his brother, whose first name I can't remember, but his last name is Saltz, was one of the original people from theater who conceived of CDACT, and he's now down in Georgia. And I yesterday got invited to be affiliated with theater because I do a lot of collaborations with a woman there, Jeanette Yu. So,
okay, so a little of everything. So how do you? Yeah, I want to talk about this more pointedly, because I think that there's actually a lot of people in the sort of like sonic sound art music, triangle, or I don't know, hexagon, or whatever the heck it is.
Dodecahedron.
Yeah, dodecahedron, right. There are a lot of people that get opportunities like that, and some people are able to manage it, and some people have trouble managing it. And the way that you see the trouble occur is that they end up not getting in depth on anything. And I would say that is not your problem. You have a tendency to really dive in depth on the things that you do. How do you maintain that focus? And how do you bat away things that are going to distract you?
So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it would have been much easier for me to get tenure if I only wrote music. So I don't quite have enough pieces if you just consider me a composer, and I don't have quite enough articles if you're considering me a new researcher, and I don't have quite enough books if you're considering me a historian. And so I think that's the way I keep from the problem of no depth. So I have a few things that I do in depth, and for me, they all fundamentally relate. So I learn things that influence my own practice when I'm doing this kind of research. I actually really enjoy producing concerts because I'll learn more about how to do my stuff better. And I guess I kind of worry sometimes because the one thing I do terribly is promotion. And so
you lie. You lie like a rug because...
Oh my God, no, I'm terrible.
Well,
you don't
I mean,
understand.
it depends on what you mean by promotion. I mean, yeah, you don't go out on Times Square and hand out flyers, but what you are really good about is saying, "Hey, this is happening," or "Hey, I'm involved in this," or "Hey, turn your gaze this direction." Which is really useful because I think a lot of times academics are scared to say, "Hey, look at this," because somehow it seems too common to do that.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I'm quite happy to say, "Hey, look at this." I am less happy to say, "Hey, look at me." And I've decided we just moved and we have to sell the old house, but once I do that, I'm going to start like emailing my old student Leanne, and because she's like, "Meg, you need a newsletter and you need to publicize because like I don't know when you have events and you like had this really cool thing that happened at school and I didn't even know that it was happening and you are a dumbass."
I see what you're saying. Right.
I'm like, well, I was so busy getting it ready and like it's and so
yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Right. I see what you're saying because for example, one of the things I was kind of sniffing around the CAA this year.
Yeah.
And I see, they have a meeting thing about sonic art. Well, that's cool. Oh, look who's running the show.
Yeah. And I did post about it on Facebook. I invited people to submit, but then when I didn't say, this is happening once it was happening. I'm just terrible. Yeah. I live very future tense, I guess.
Well, that's better that than others, I guess.
I guess. So I've decided that I'm going to like very casually write Leanne emails about what's going on and then she can like package it up. I don't know. I have a block. So
yeah, I hear you. It could be a thing, and especially when you're having to weigh that work with doing research or doing a composition or preparing a piece. It's really hard to say, yeah, I'm going to do a Facebook blitz.
Right. But I realize as well, though, that the people that are good at that are going to get opportunities that I'm not. Like, I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time to meet the Meyer sound people.
Right.
But how nice would it have been if like my website had been up to date and like people had written about stuff that I had done and they would, instead of having to just trust me, I could actually look around. And so I wrote a grant for school to go out to San Francisco for this thing. And so Meyer wrote and said, well, we're going to donate all this equipment. And the lab wrote and said, whenever that equipment is ready, we will do something because this is hella cool. And I actually made sure to put in a budget for promotion and documentation because I'm like, this is going to be big and I need to actually take advantage of it fully in a way that maybe I haven't to this point because that is the hard thing for me. And it's so funny because like I have all my like composition students and I'll be like, well, this is the hard thing for you. So you really need to do it. And I'm like, damn it. Like, this is the hard thing for me. Like, it sounds so stupid. I'm like, yes, I'm going to learn all the math behind wavefield synthesis. And yes, I'm going to do all this in-depth research to 5 nodes on every first like person thing that I can find on this. But like, writing and saying, hey, come to my stuff.
Right. That's, what's interesting is that's like the least technical and that requires the least amount of so-called practice. But I think in the end, that does end up being the hard thing for people, right?
It just depends on your personality. I guess. That's the hard thing for me, and I need to suck it up.
Yeah, indeed. So, thinking about this CAA thing makes me want to ask now, As a person coming from a very heavy-duty music background, what does sound art mean to you, and how do you kind of relate the one side to the other? Because personally, I teach sound and musical concepts in an art department. Mm-hmm. I'm really glad I get to do that, because teaching in an art department is vastly different from the kind of students and the kind of track you see in a music program.
Yes.
How do you play those two, and how do you go to CAA and say, hey, I'm a musician, but we do sound, and here's how it looks like, and we're embracing of what you do? How do you pull that off?
Well, I think it helps that sound art is sort of hot and trendy right now, and they're just desperate. So they're like, yay, somebody that sort of knows something. I started sort of using the term sound artist when I was getting my doctorate, I guess, because people would come to my stuff and be like, that wasn't music. And then I was working with Charlie Woodman, who was in the art department, DAP, I think. Anyway, I can look that up and correct it later. And so the artists actually tended to be more forgiving and less critical. And so I found out about this term. Like, some people say sort of sound sculpture, or I'm a sound artist. I learned about Max Neuhaus at the time, and he hated the term, but I was like, it actually sort of makes sense to me as a term. So I started calling myself a sound artist, and I sort of distanced myself from the term composer for a while. And now I've sort of returned to composer, because I did a lot of work researching sound art. And for me, the distinction, I guess, would be that the composer writes works that should be heard in a concert hall from start to finish in general. Right. And then the sound artist creates pieces that people can wander in and out of that might be in a gallery. But then there are pieces that people want you to sit in a gallery from start to finish. And there are pieces for, like, Feldman has these 6-hour pieces, and he didn't expect people to stay totally attentive in the audience for the whole time. So it's always that great.
Well, I always tend to think of the difference as being one where generally, or at least one of the defining factors for me, is that a composition is something that, or a composerly composition is something that could be played by someone else. Where often sound art has to be produced by the artist, because the decision-making process is too close to the surface to pass it off. I don't know. You know, I'm sure there would be some people like Pauline, I'm sure, would tell me I was full of crap. And in fact, I can hear her in my head already telling me I'm full of crap. But that's Pauline, and that's where she lives in my head. If that tells you anything about my head. But anyway, that's interesting. Now, let's talk about this composition that you're working on. How traditional is it going to be?
Yeah, I don't know yet. So I wrote this very traditional violin piece called Partita Perihelion, because there was we have a doctoral of musical arts program at Stony Brook, so we have amazing players, and I had a violinist who took my computer music class, and she was like, I really like this stuff, but I don't play new music, and I don't have that sort of intuitive understanding of it, but I have to program something fairly modern on my recital because it's a requirement. Right. And I like the sounds of stuff that you do, and I know you're a cellist, and so could you write me something? And I was like, yeah.
Interesting.
And I had heard her play Bach, and it was unreal. Like, the way that she was actually able to articulate the polyphony that was implied in the single line was amazing. And so I was like, what if I could actually help her articulate that polyphony with some sort of max patch. And so I had the idea of doing this like sort of recursive stretching algorithm. And then Tom Erb wrote me a max patch that does it. And so each of the movements has a different point at which below that threshold on note level frequency, it'll start stretching out the notes. And so you can, the first movement only makes a single ground, and then the second movement creates chords, and the third movement creates this whole crazy cloud. And that's been one of my most successful pieces. It's been played everywhere. There's like two or three violinists that program it regularly. One of them is Michaela, and she's down at West Virginia, and they just recorded it in a recording session that I got snowed out of. But nice. it'll be fine. And she has a duo with a flutist, and they were like, "We love this piece, and we're going on tour, and you should write us a violin and flute piece." And I was like, "I'm so busy, but I love the way that you play." And I heard her play with the flutist, and it's typical Meg. I'm like, "No, I can't do it." And then 2 hours later, I'm like, "Well, if I were to do it, do you guys ever do this? 'Cause that," and like, what could be kind of cool is like I've been obsessed with this Barrio piece for a while now. That's this viola, like really thorny viola thing over the top of these like recorded folk songs, and then these occasional like percussion things. And like if you could play alto flute, then you could switch lines really easily, and then I could have like one thorny line and one folk song line, and then both of you can do sort of percussive effects, and so we could like add that percussive element, and it would be kind of cool. And then if each had a pedal, you would have to like cue and know that you were switching over between like, but it could be cool. And they're like, "Yeah, that sounds good." I'm like, "Oh, damn it. What did I just get myself into?" Because I was like, "No, I can't do it." And then of course I'm just sitting there and the wheels are turning, and I'm like, "Oh, it would be good though." Right. And then, so at NAMM, I saw the new air turn pedals, and they're like tiny, and it's going to be good. I usually hate pedals, but I'm like, I can't think of any way to do this without pedals. Right. So each of them is going to have a pedal that will switch the processing. So the thorny new music line is going to have some sort of harmonizer thing, and I'm thinking that like the noisiness of the signal will make the crunchier chord sort of thing, because I wanted the flute to be able to play double stops basically, because they can't. Right. And then the flute, the folk sort of line, I'm trying to figure out how to have like a knob to turn up the Bulgarian women's choir effect. So I was talking to Miller about this. I'm like, how'd you make a Bulgarian women's choir heterophony knob?
Oh man. All right.
So there'll probably be some Facebook posts about that soon.
Yeah, really. Well, just when you start figuring out the math of that, you have to make sure that you let everyone know, right?
But I think it'd be amazing, and I also have to figure out sort of what character that I can get from the violin or flute that would be a control for that. So I really like leaving room for the performers to know exactly how they're controlling it and have it be just an extension of their instrument instead of this is going to happen. I want it to be under their control. And so they'll each have one half of the 2-button pedal for each of them will be the thing that flips them over to the other one. And I'm trying to figure out if there also could be a way that it crossfades, and whether there could be something that I'm measuring that then would determine how quickly the sounds crossfade. But it might just be immediate. I have to figure that out. And then the other pedal would be like stomp on the pedal, play something percussive, and you get like a big boom, like chakalaka thing.
Right. Boom chakalaka. The important part of every composition
is the boom chakalaka.
Is the boom chakalaka. All right. Well, we're getting to the end of the road here, but so normally when I interview people for the first time, the big question is, tell me about your background and how you got to be the artist you are. Since we are in the February revisiting mode, I don't have to do that because we've already done that with you. But I want to do something different, which is I want to say 15 years from now, when it's February and I'm doing my Meg Schedel Revisited It Again podcast, where are you going to be? Where do you see yourself going over a longer period of time? Because it's really easy to say, well, I have just kind of set the plate for all the things I'm going to do in the next 6 months or even 18 months.
Yeah.
But where do you see the big vector? Where is all of this going to take you in the long run future?
Yeah, so that's exactly the thing that I was sitting at SynMat trying to figure out, because I've discovered that I'm an appallingly good administrator, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll be dean or provost and I'll be able to, chart the direction of Stony Brook. And even SUNY as a whole has been sort of knocking at my door a little bit, because I did this massive open online course and they're like, oh, you're so fantastic at that. And not to be like, I'm amazing at everything, but I have a student who's similar to me, where we're actually incredibly incompetent and we've just figured out systems. And so I'm like, Taylor, I swear, like when you're 36, you are going to come into your own, my friend, because all these other people that were able to tie their shoelaces without an 18-point plan of how to tie their shoelaces are going to be stymied when it comes to a 50-point plan.
Right.
But because you and I have always needed to like write out the 18 points to do our laundry or like leave the house or pay a bill, we're actually ahead of the game. And the fact that we have to write everything down will actually come in handy, because we won't be counting on our memory. We'll be counting on our notes, and we've figured out how to do that really well. And so I was like, I don't think I want to be president of a university, because that seems like a lot of fundraising goes into it. But wow, it could be cool to be dean. And then I was sitting at SynMat and I was like, F that. F helping everybody with what I do. I want to help the weirdos. I want to help the people that are in between art and science, and in between music and art, and in between human-computer interaction and not being able to interact with humans. Right. And I really want to run a place like SynMat. I don't know whether it would be bounded as closely to music. I do know that bounds are helpful, but I want to have a place that has a kitchen and a backyard and a space that can have lectures and concerts and hangouts, and has awesome people there from multiple disciplines conversing on a really respectful and deep level and making cool stuff.
Well, that sounds like a plan. I'm rooting for you on that one, because that sounds pretty awesome.
I think it'd be cool.
Yeah. Well, Meg, I want to thank you so much for taking the time again to talk with me.
And thanks for blackmailing me into it by saying, if you can't do it this week, I'll find someone else. I noted.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to just write down here that actually worked. Because there's an awful lot of other things I've said that haven't worked at all. So
Meg is competitive.
Indeed, sure enough. Well, thanks so much. As always, it's been a blast talking to you and all that.
I love your podcasts, and you know that, because I try not to share every one of them so I don't seem like a sycophant, but
I don't know. I don't have a problem with sycophants.
Okay,
so.
Okay, sure. But my students have been totally loving your podcasts too. So
that's great. Fantastic.
I'm so excited that you're doing this, and it's going to become a really, I think, important archive for the people in the future.
I hope so.
Yay.
Yay. All right.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. And I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, Darwin.
Bye. Many thanks to Meg for spending the time talking to us again. Always interesting to talk to her, find out what she's doing, and also find out what's happening in her neck of the woods. She just is kind of tapped into everything, so it's really cool to check it out. So with that, I want to thank you again for listening, and make sure you tell your friends, family, coworkers, whatever, to tune in on our little podcast. It's really exciting to see it continue to grow. Next week is number 74. Those of you who know me know that means something a little bit special. So until then, I want to thank you for your listenership, and we'll catch you next week.